Hey, how's it going? And today we are going to be taking a look at queues and how they're set up. And I wanted to do this because I think it can be a little bit confusing. If you go into the documentation here, there's a whole section on stacks and queues. And I think you're more likely to see a queue, the functionality of a queue versus the functionality of a stack. The queue is like something that you would normally see like when you're, let's say you're inputting text on a field and then you hit the backspace. That's essentially operating almost like a queue. So that's more like or in a chat, you see it set up more like a queue where people are like essentially waiting in a line. Here in this documentation, it has all the code already written for you. So what you do is just copy this and paste this. What I have right now is I just have a button device and my verse device, and the button's paired to the verse device, and all this is in the code. So let me walk through this and I'll do my best to try to explain it. Here is all the code that we've just copied straight from the documentation page right here. We haven't changed any of it. I've changed some of the wording. Now, some of the tips and tricks on this whole thing is that when you bring it in, this needs to be up on top. It can't be beneath your creative device. So be sure to paste this up on top here or you're going to get an error. We can kind of walk through this a little bit. We have essentially these 6 methods within this class, and we have this array set up. Essentially, you'll notice this is our array is with the T and then the brackets. So it's essentially open to the data type of the array. So it wants an array, but it's open to the data type that's in that array. This is all this kind of means here. This on queue, it will add someone to the back of the line, and then it also returns this, which is a queue. So it returns a queue when you call it. And we'll get into the implications of that in a little bit here. And this is DQ, and this removes somebody from the front of the array. And then it returns a tuple with the queue with the element removed, and then it also sends you the element that was removed in case you want to do something with that. And then these are all pretty straightforward. The size is empty, the front element, the rear element. And you'll notice these are all have the decides transacts, which means that they have to be called with an if statement. So anytime you see that, that's what you got to do. And then we have a constructor function. You really do need to use it because if you don't, you're going to start getting all kinds of errors regarding the type. So when we go to create our queue, we'll be using this constructor function. And then down here we have our creative device, and we have our @editable for our button. And then we have an array. We just have 5 strings in it. I just have some names in there. And then I have just this variable value that it's an integer and we're just setting it to 0. And then we just have a constant string that we're going to be adding this element here, Joey Cool. Okay, and then here we are in the meat and potato section. Here we're going to call create queue with my array, the array that we built up here, and that essentially instantiates a new queue for us right here. And we're just calling it, I'm just calling it my queue, right? And then because this is a value, we can query my queue now and get the size of it. So this will print out the value. When we go to test this, you'll see when we see a value here, then we know that our array was accepted into the queue and is operating within the queue. Okay. So then here, what we're going to do is I have these lines of code set up here. I have 6 of them. So every time I press the button, it releases this section of code to implement. Basically, we can walk through these different functions this way. So I just have my button. I don't have it subscribed to anything. It's just the awaits waiting for this event. And then when it does, it releases the code until it gets to the next awaits event. And then it stops until the button gets pressed again. Without pressing any button, it's just going to tell us how many elements are in the queue. And it should say 5. So here what we're going to do is we're going to add an element. So we're going to call my queue with the on queue and send it that my string, which is Joey Cool. And when it's going to return is a queue, but I can't put that queue into the old queue because that's immutable. This is not, I can't add to this. So I need to create a new queue. So it sends me a queue, and this goes on a lot in Verse where you have to basically swap out the old with the new, So I need to, this queue still exists, but I'm creating another one so that I'll have one queue with 5 elements in it and another one with 6 elements in it. So this creates a new queue. Now with this new queue, I can query it and ask what is the rear element on this, right? So it should be, the rear element should be Joey Cool because that's the last one we just added. And because it has a decides transact, we have to put it within a conditional statement. So this should say, we're going to print out the rear element should now be Joey Cool in the new queue, right? And then when we check the queue size for new queue, you'll see that it should be 6, right? And there's that. So here we're calling, this is all a completely separate queue right here now, kind of, right? So now here I'm dequeuing the old queue. This created its own separate queue here that has 6 elements in it. This, we're going to dequeue the original queue that we had and dequeue it. And when it returns a tuple, and the first element in the tuple right here is the queue, but we have to assign it again because it's been altered to a new, give it a new name, and I'm just calling this new Q2. And then it also, in the second position of the tuple, is the removed item itself. So here I'm querying what the item was. It would be the first item to dequeue is going to be the item in the front. So that would be Joey Smith. So Joey Smith is our first item, Joe Smith. So that's the first item that would be removed. And so to say remove Joey Smith from queue. And then with this new Q2, I can ask what's the front element now that Joey's been removed, and it should say Tanny Glover. So this will say in the new queue, the front element is now Tanny Glover, right? And then here we just jump back to the old queue and query if it's empty. This is going to say, is it empty? And it's not empty, so it's going to fail. So I can use the not to change the fail to success. So when I go, is it empty? Because it's not empty, this is going to fail, and this wouldn't print. But if I put not, that negates this and turns it to success. So then this will end up succeeding. And this is just all here querying the old queue. And here we just get the front element, the rear element, and then we conclude with that's it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And then we can come into the game and hit start. And we'll see it says the queue populated and has 5 elements. So we know that our array went into the queue. And if I come over here now and I press the button, the rear element should now be Joey Cool. That's correct because we added to the on queue and the queue size is now 6. So that is correct. And we'll hit E again. We removed Joey Smith first from the queue. In the new queue, the front element is now Tanny Glover. That also is correct. We hit E. The old queue is not empty. That's also correct. The old queue has the front element of Joe Smith. The old queue rear element is Boulder Collingsworth. That's correct. And lastly, that's it. I hope you found this of some help. Take care. Have a great day. And I'll talk to you next time.